She came with nothing but a suitcase, a dream, and a promise of love. But the moment she stepped off the bus, whispers turned to stares, and stares turned to doors slamming in her face. No one cared about her heart, her kindness, or her courage, only the color of her skin. Alone in a town that had already judged her, she stood on the edge of giving up. But then, someone unexpected saw her. Was it fate, or just another cruel twist in her journey? For most of her life, Amara had learned to keep her head down and her hopes high. Back in her small coastal village, days were simple. Sunrise over the water, laughter with neighbors, and evenings spent helping her mother cook. When a letter arrived from a man in America promising marriage and a better future, it felt like the answer to every prayer she had whispered into the wind. Weeks later, she found herself stepping onto the dusty main street of a rural town she'd never seen before. The air smelled of wheat and wood smoke, but under it lingered something, colder, a silence that followed her every step. She didn't know it yet, but the promise that brought her here was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. At first, Amara told herself it was just nerves, a new town, unfamiliar faces. It was natural to feel out of place. But the longer she stayed, the harder it was to ignore the looks. People didn't just glance at her. They studied her, their eyes narrowing as if her presence was an offense. At the bakery, the woman behind the counter served everyone before her, even those who'd just walked in. At the post office, the clerk spoke to her like she couldn't understand English, slow and clipped, his tone cold. Then came the letters. Slipped under the door at night, unsigned, written in jagged handwriting, "Go home. You don't belong here." The first one made her chest tighten. By the third, she stopped sleeping through the night, waking at every creak of the old farmhouse walls. Her fiancé, William, seemed blind to it all. "They just need time to warm up to you," he'd say, brushing it off. But Amara could feel the truth in her bones. This wasn't about time. This was about the color of her skin, and no amount of patience would change that. One evening, walking back from the market, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, measured. She turned and saw 3 men leaning against a truck, their laughter low and mocking. One of them called out, a word she had hoped never to hear again. Her pace quickened. Their footsteps followed. The next day, her job at the local dress shop, one she'd been promised before her arrival, was suddenly no longer available. The owner wouldn't meet her eyes, mumbling something about customer preferences. That night, she found another note under the door. This one was different. Bigger letters. Red ink. Last warning. She tried to tell William, but he only sighed, telling her not to overreact. His distance stung almost as much as the cruelty outside. And then, just as she began to think she might have to leave, the man who would change everything stepped into her life. Right when she was certain there was no one left in this town who saw her as human. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low behind the wheat fields, when it happened. Amara had gone into town for groceries, clutching her small list and the last of her savings. As she stepped out of the store, bags in hand, a truck screeched to a stop in front of her. The same men from before. Their faces twisted into smirks that sent a chill through her spine. One of them stepped forward, blocking her path. "Didn't we warn you?" His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something darker. Another man kicked one of her grocery bags, sending apples rolling into the street. Laughter echoed around her, sharp and cruel. She tried to move past, but they closed in, their shoulders forming a wall. A hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Hard, too hard. "We don't want your kind here," he spat, the words like venom. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She thought about running, screaming, but the street was empty. The store clerk inside had already turned away, pretending not to see. Then, the sound of heavy boots on gravel. A deep voice cut through the air. "Let her go." The grip on her wrist tightened for one last painful second before releasing. She turned to see a tall man in a worn hat, his broad frame casting a shadow over the men. His eyes were steady, unflinching, and fixed on them with a silent warning. The men hesitated, muttering under their breath before retreating to the truck. Tires spun, dust rising as they sped away. Amara's hands shook, her groceries scattered on the ground. The man stepped forward, offering a hand, not just to help her up, but as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." What she didn't know was that this meeting would change the course of her life, and the town's forever. In the days that followed, Amara learned that the man who had stepped in, Thomas Hale, was a wealthy farmer on the outskirts of town. Unlike the others, he didn't see her as an outsider to be feared, but as a person worth knowing. He offered her work, a safe place to stay, and, most importantly, respect. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt the tension in, her chest ease, but the scars remained. The memory of those men, the letters, the way the town had turned its back, it would never fully fade. And yet, in the quiet strength of someone willing to stand beside her, Amara found something she had almost lost entirely: hope. Her life slowly began to rebuild, but she knew her story was just one among countless others. For every person who finds an ally, there are many more left standing alone in the face of hate. Her experience was not an isolated moment. It was a mirror reflecting a reality that still exists today, in small towns and big cities alike. Racism doesn't always wear a uniform or shout in the streets. Sometimes it hides in silence. In the eyes that look away, in the opportunities quietly taken, and it thrives when good people convince themselves it's not their problem. Amara's story reminds us that one act of courage can change a life, but silence can destroy one just as easily. So the question remains, when the moment comes, will you turn away, or will you be the one who steps forward?